Welcome into the GoVols247 Podcast. I'm Ben McKee, and I'm joined by Patrick Brown on this Christmas Eve edition of the GoVols247 Podcast here on a Monday morning. We have made it back to Knoxville following the debacle in Columbus on Saturday night. Tennessee loses to Ohio State 42-17, and Tennessee did do a good job of bouncing back in the second quarter after an abysmal first quarter to give itself a chance coming out of halftime and getting the ball to start the second half. But things did not go according to plan there, and Ohio State runs away with a decisive victory to end Tennessee's season. We will dive into the game, what we feel like went wrong, what is to come. There's so much to discuss as it pertains to Tennessee football in the wake of its loss to Ohio State. But first, need to check in with Patrick Brown and see how he is doing. Patrick, good morning. How are you?
Doing pretty good. Getting back to town yesterday, and it's weird because it's like in my head, I'm like, okay, I need to do this, and this, get this content out, and I'm like, oh, Tuesday is Christmas Eve. So I don't know. It's just sort of this is new territory for everyone, and so. With the 12-team playoff, but it was it was a good experience in Columbus. Cool, seeing a place that's you've seen on TV a lot throughout your life, and then seeing it in person and being there. And before we start talking about the game, we got to commend Tennessee fans. I know a lot of you out there listening were probably in the stands, freezing. Great showing from them, and it's disappointing that the team kind of let you guys down and played so poorly. But it was checking out a different place was interesting, and seeing a different stadium and all that stuff was cool. But now, the season's over and it's off season mode. Well, Absolutely. It's Christmas time, but it's off season mode. So it's just unique.
Right. And Tennessee was in off season mode before it even went to Columbus. And I'm not referencing how they played. I'm referencing their actions in the portal. Have already picked up one commitment from Arizona transfer Wendell Moore Jr. along the offensive line. They have hosted other visitors. There's a bit of a dead period coming up, and then I'm sure they'll host more transfer visitors after that as well. So they have been a bit in off-season mode because of the calendar, and Josh Heupel spoke about that after the game. If you missed any of Josh Heupel's comments following the loss on Saturday night, we have video up on our YouTube page at GoVols247. We have the transcript up at the site. All the transcripts you need from over the weekend are up on the site with Josh Heupel, with Nico Iamaleava, both coordinators, Joey Halsley and Tim Banks, both spoke, Ryan Day, and much more. So please be sure to check all that out if you have not already. And before we do dive into the X's and O's, Patrick, I will add on to what you said about the atmosphere. It was cool to check out another stadium, historic stadium. We have grown up following Tennessee football, and now we have unique jobs in following it and covering it. But you and I are also college football fans. And I'm sure just like you, for me, the Horseshoe, it was on the bucket list of college football stadiums I want to go to, along with South Bend and Penn State and USC. I know they don't get great crowds, but I think it would still
Michigan.
Be cool to go to the game out there. Michigan, the Big House. Thank you. The Horseshoe was at the top of the list for me. I've never much cared for Ohio State, and it sounds like Tennessee fans moving forward will not much care for Ohio State based off of some of their experiences. I've been surprised to see some of the reaction from Tennessee fans' experiences over the weekend. It's all been negative that I've seen. Just a lot of negative reaction to interacting with Ohio State fans. It sounds like the two parties did not necessarily see eye to eye, to say the least. And of course, we hear one side of the story, that Ohio State fans were not all that great and welcoming. But I don't think I've ever heard as much negative reaction to dealing with a fan base as I've heard from Tennessee fans in the wake of going up to Ohio State over the weekend. So I thought that was interesting. But kudos to all the Tennessee fans that made it. they truly did take over the stadium for a true away game. They did, and it's something to be commended for. Ohio State fans, I'm sure, are joking on Tennessee fans. I haven't been on social media much, but Tennessee fans have kind of been the butt of the joke since Saturday night, and that doesn't make quite sense to me because they did not play a single snap in the football game, and they did their part. And whether Tennessee won by 50 or nearly lost by 50 like they did, you can't say anything about the fans because the fans showed out in a way that we have never really seen in college football before. It was very similar to how Georgia overtook South Bend a couple years ago when they played at Notre Dame. It's uncommon to see that many road fans in a opponent stadium like we saw on Saturday, Patrick. It's even more uncommon for it to happen at Ohio State. That's not Vanderbilt Tennessee played at Saturday night. And we know that Tennessee takes over Vanderbilt Stadium every 2 years. I mean, it was a very similar feel to that inside of the Horseshoe on Saturday night. And as we were just talking about kind of the bucket list destinations amongst college football fans, I mean, that's not too shabby. I mean, that's not a place where fans are taking over and you see more of the opponent's colors. I mean, I was amazed by how many Tennessee fans showed up, and they should not feel any shame because they did their part on Saturday night.
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable because I mean, you're talking about Ohio State. This is one of the biggest fan bases in the country too. Like this isn't like they didn't get paired up with like an Indiana who's like, you know, kind of new. I mean, kind of a new. I don't want to say Indiana football. I'm just using them as an example because they were in the playoff. Like it's not. It's like Tennessee got sent to Bloomington, where a fan base A isn't as big and B is, Johnny come lately to being, invested and interested in football. That's a basketball school up there. So, I mean, you went up there and took over one of the blue blood stadiums. And what's annoyed me is that Ross Bjork, the Ohio State athletic director, came out and was like, there was no takeover, there was no invasion. I'm like, you're literally telling us to deny what we all saw with our own eyes. I mean, anyone that was there knows it. There's been, some Ohio State fan hit me up on our private messages on our site. It was like, yeah, there was no takeover. I'm like, were you there? I was there. I know what I saw. Everyone else knows what they saw. So, it's just typical, I guess, denial.
I feel like those people are getting confused on what takeover is. I mean, Tennessee didn't.
There were 35,000.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
they didn't have 50%. Taking over the stadium for an opposing fan base in a blue blood stadium isn't 50% or more in attendance. It's exactly what Tennessee had on Saturday night, which is Ohio State should be ashamed. I mean, it hosted a home playoff game and it allowed that much orange to be in the stadium. And I don't care about the excuse of potentially holding out for a Rose Bowl trip, this, that, and the other. You have one of the biggest fan bases in the country. There's enough to go around. And for them to let that much orange in the stadium is they should be embarrassed, quite frankly, because there aren't many places that for a home playoff game that's allowing that many opposing fans inside of their building.
Well, and beyond all those comments, I mean, an Ohio State player talked about after the game. Donovan Jackson, who's one of their offensive lineman, who's been a starting guard, who's played at left tackle because they've had injuries, said, "This is a quote from him after the game. It made us feel some type of way coming out to warm-ups, and we were getting booed. We were like, wait a second, what did they call it? Kneeling North or something like that? Yeah, that was lame." I mean, that's a slam on Ohio State's fan base. It's not like, I mean, yeah, tickets early in the week were going crazy, and some of the prices I heard some people were paying were kind of mind blowing. As a father of two kids and I'm trying to get through preschool, but by Saturday, I mean, we were seeing stuff like, I don't know, somebody screenshot something that was like, get in prices were like $65. I mean, to get decent tickets. So yeah, poor showing from Ohio State fans, but I guess they were in, prove it to me mode, and their team definitely proved it. So, but that should take nothing away from what Tennessee fans did. And again, and Josh Heupel and the players talked about this too. I mean, they said that, to go out there and see all that orange and then to play that badly just adds to the disappointment on their end. And certainly there were a lot of people, as you touched on, that maybe won't have the fondest experience, but we'll see if Tennessee ever has to go back there.
And Ohio State fans are correct in being braggadocious. I mean, so many people doubted them and their ability to win, including myself. I mean, I was completely wrong about the football game. I could not have been more wrong about the football game. I picked Tennessee to win. You did as well, Patrick. You're in the same boat as I am. Um, and so they are right for being braggadocious about the actual game, about the actual plays on the field, not about the fans. That is a takeover. It doesn't require being more than 50% in attendance for it to be a takeover. For a blue blood to have that many opposing fans get into their building and for Rocky Top to be blaring pregame, and
A
you
game
just read
day.
off.
Game day was a takeover. I mean,
Right.
yeah.
Kirk Herbstreit's comments were everywhere about how he had never seen this many Tennessee fans or opposing fans at a college game day setting. And you read the offensive lineman's quotes about being booed coming out of the tunnel. Their own players recognized how many Tennessee fans were in attendance. So the percentage of that building that was painted orange was remarkable, and it was a takeover in that regard, because that is not common, and that's kind of why I view it as a takeover. So for that to be kind of the conversation after the game, and kind of that be your talking point and sticking point, like you're incorrect in doing so, because the fans had no part of the game. They did not determine the outcome. They did not lose the game. They helped Tennessee potentially win the game. They did their part of making Tennessee feel somewhat comfortable in pregame warmups, and then the team let them down. You should be braggadocious about how your team beat down Tennessee on the field, not about how the stands looked, because quite frankly, you should be embarrassed by how the stands looked. But did want to point out the atmosphere, because that was obviously a huge part of the football game and a big discussion all week long. On the field, Patrick, I mean, Ohio State just completely overwhelmed Tennessee. It was vintage Ohio State. I completely underestimated Ohio State. I was very aware that the roster for Ohio State from top to bottom was better than Tennessee's, and that their roster had more potential for explosiveness than Tennessee's. But I did not think Ohio State was that good. And not only was I wrong in that, Tennessee caught them on Ohio State's best day. And you pair that with Tennessee playing one of its worst days of the season. I think they were worse at Ohio State than they were at Georgia. So I think
By
you
far.
had Tennessee on its worst day and Ohio State on its best day. And Ohio State on its best day, I don't know that there's a team in the country that's beating them this year if they can play to their potential, because you sit there and you watch that football game and you're thinking, how in the world did this team lose to Michigan? How did they lose to Oregon, even at Oregon on the road earlier in the season? And Oregon, of course, the number one team in the country. But that was kind of just big picture, very simple, generic take. Uh, once the buzzer sounded and the season was over, was that I totally underestimated Ohio State, and I gave Tennessee too much of the benefit of the doubt. I did. I should not have given them as much trust and, again, the benefit of the doubt as much as I did.
Yeah. Your analysis of the game doesn't really need to go much deeper than that. I mean, Ohio State has one of the probably two best rosters in college football. They were the preseason number 2 team, and probably pretty high up on the betting odds for the national championship going into the season for a reason. I mean, they touted a $20 million roster. They spent heavily to have a bunch of guys that were potentially going to go to the NFL and get them back for their senior seasons. They went and pluck some guys out of the portal that were probably not cheap. When you look at Caleb Downs, Quinshon Judkins, Seth McLaughlin, who the center who didn't even play in the game because he's hurt, but they put together a roster to go win it all. Not to mention that they stole the sitting power conference head coach in Chip Kelly, who obviously is built Oregon into the Oregon that we know that it is, along with Mike Bellotti, but also went to the NFL. I mean, obviously Chip Kelly is one of the best offensive minds in college football. So I don't know that I overlook them, but there was a lot of doubt, and there was a lot of doubt in Columbus too. I mean, you watch some of their interviews last week with Ryan Day and their players, and two and a half weeks later, they're still talking about the Michigan game. But both those teams were good enough to go 10-2, but also sketchy enough to lose games that maybe it shouldn't have when you look at Tennessee losing to Arkansas. So I wrote my prediction that it was entirely possible that we get the usual road version of Tennessee, and we all know what it looks like, and that Ohio State just out talents Tennessee, and both those things happened. I mean, we're gonna get maybe into the bigger picture discussion of this, but if we're going to, if college football is sort of shifting more toward being a little bit like college basketball with March Madness, right? I mean, we always wonder, particularly Tennessee under Rick Barnes. Okay, can they, how far can they go in the tournament? The answer is always, well, it depends on matchups, right? So, and now when you get in the college football playoff, it's going to be about your matchups. And, I'm not saying Tennessee would have beat Notre Dame, would have beat Penn State. Those are different teams that have different strengths. And obviously both of them won handily as well in their home games. And you could throw Texas in there too. But Tennessee ran into Ohio State and Ohio State was good and Tennessee was bad and shorthanded. So, and then you get what you get. So, yeah, I mean, they ran into a really talented roster and a great coaching staff that was on. And, you can say great coaching staff. Well, all the heat about Ryan Day. Ryan Day is 67-10. I mean, it's just a matter of perspective because he's lost 4 games to Michigan and hasn't won a national title. And I'm sure his situation has been exacerbated by Michigan winning the past 3 Big Tens and winning the national title last season, albeit under, maybe some shady circumstances. But that's why there's so much, I guess, discussion or whatever about him, despite his record being ridiculous. I mean, I think most fans would say, like, if our coach is 67-10, like, we love him, but it's not up there. But that's, that's just kind of, I guess, how Ohio State is with that Michigan rivalry. So, but yeah, I mean, that's the basic analysis. And, I mean, you just look at the talent gap between the teams, and we can get into this more later, but that definitely showed up. But also, the things that were maybe most surprising to me is that Tennessee's defensive line just completely no-showed. Because there was all the talk about Ohio State's offensive line's beat up. They're still trying to figure things out. They might be starting their 9th different guy, and Tennessee's defense it was the same thing like it did at Georgia, where there was no impact on the game. And when there's no impact on the game, the other parts of the defense were a little exposed and couldn't hold up against what arguably was the strength of the team. I mean, you look at Ohio State's wide receivers. I mean, Jeremiah Smith could play in the NFL right now. He's Julio Jones reincarnated. Emeka Ibuka is going to make an NFL offense better next season, and probably would this season if he had gone pro. So you just look at those 2 guys, and then obviously when they didn't get any pressure on Will Howard, that's when he's he can be pretty good when he's not at all under pressure, and he was not under pressure. So then Ohio State's defense was able to win up front, and didn't have to get out of its comfort zone as Joey Halsey kind of talked about. So all those things happened, and it's, you get what you got on the scoreboard.
Defensively, it was just such a poor night at all 3 levels. The defensive front was unable to slow down the running game, but it was even more highlighted, their poor play, that is, in the passing game, because I don't even really feel like Ohio State ran the ball a ton, especially through the first 2-3 quarters as it was building its lead. It was all through the passing game. And yes, Tennessee's defensive front was not generating pressure. They allowed Will Howard to become too comfortable. But I was also kind of making the point throughout the game to you all sitting next to me, because obviously there was talk about Will Howard has all day to throw, and he absolutely did. I'm not making an excuse. I'm adding on is what I'm doing. But guys were wide open from the snap of the football. Receivers were wide open in the slot down the seam. I mean, from the snap of the football, just nobody covering them. And so in addition to the defensive front not generating pressure, it's also hard to generate pressure when Will Howard can throw to somebody right at the snap of the football because they're wide open. So it was just all systems fail, quite frankly, by the defensive front and their inability to slow down the run game when Ohio State did run the ball, inability to generate pressure. At the second level, there were missed tackles, there were busted coverages. And then in the third level, I don't think the corners really had any busted coverages. They just kind of got beat by better players. And, Tennessee is good at corner, but Ohio State has great receivers, and their great receivers got the best of Tennessee's good corners, especially Ricky Gibson. And Jamal McCoy had one a little bit later in the game. But the safety play I thought was really poor outside of Will Brooks's interception. Just guys running wide open in the secondary, and it was down the middle of the field. So I'm inclined to think that is mostly on the safeties. We obviously don't know for sure who the responsibilities are on any given play and who they're responsible for covering. But it just seemed like very similar to Georgia. Ohio State attacked the middle of Tennessee's defense through the air, and they picked them apart. And it was just not a good combination. It was, again, I think all systems fail with the inability to create a pass rush, the inability to negate the run, the traditional run when Ohio State did. Not only did Ohio State and Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins kind of get out of the box, but when they got out of the box, they were able to make guys miss because of poor angles, diving at ankles. I just thought it was a really poor performance from Tennessee's defense, really every which way you look at it.
Yeah, and the dilemma with defending Ohio State is, I mean, if you're going to play man against those wide receivers, you're asking for it. I go back to the four big plays in the first half. Tennessee had guys in position to make plays on each of those, right? The first touchdown to Jeremiah Smith was just a deep ball one-on-one coverage. Gibson got a little bit turned the wrong way. He turned inside as Smith broke outside, and that was enough separation to where he couldn't recover. And when he did try to get the ball out, Smith completed the catch. The long one to Ibuka, where he ran right down the middle of the field between the safeties. Jacoby Thomas is a tad late, probably because he had his eyes in the wrong spot. The football literally goes right here. If he had turned or, looked for the ball, he could have broken the pass up or intercepted it. And Ibuka makes a great catch. There's a great picture that I used on after the game where the ball is literally right next to Jacoby Thomas' helmet. Fine margins in this game. You look at the Travion Henderson touchdown run. They got Tennessee's defense flowing. He hit the cutback lane, but Will Brooks is coming downhill and is in the gap. He just misplays it. I don't know if he just misread the speed. And, I'd mentioned in some of the preview stuff I did last week that you can't let Henderson get ahead of steam, because if he does, he's impossible to tackle. And then, they had the backside corner who had no shot once he had so much cushion to sort of exploit, and that created a bad angle. And then there was a fourth down play before the Will Brooks interception that ultimately didn't lead to points, but they bring Smith across the middle, and Christian Charles is there. He's in the right position. You just got to make the play. And Tennessee didn't make plays and sort of continued in the second half as well. But defensively, Tennessee, they got the full Ohio State offense experience, and they just had no answers for it. And I don't know how you do, to be honest, because not many teams are going to have the corners who can stand up to guarding Ibuka, Smith. They didn't even use Cornell Tate that much, but he's another guy that they can throw to. You ask guys to go against them in man, you're asking for it. But if you play zone all night, they run such good beaters. And I remember a play, I think it was in the third quarter, maybe on the first touchdown drive of the third quarter, where they just sort of layered one side where they had a receiver take the safety deep. They had the running back out in the flat, keep a couple of closer defenders, and there's a huge gap for the tight end. There was nobody near him. They ran a couple of deep crossing routes that take a long time to develop, and that's something that Tim Banks said after the game, and everybody's like, well, he didn't say anything in his interview. Well, he talked about how the pass rush and the coverage were not on the same page, and that's what happens, right? If you're not able to get a pass rush, you can run deep crossing routes that are 15, 20 yards downfield that, the guy's literally running across the field. Those take 4 or 5 seconds to develop, and that, you're exposing your secondary to hold up that long, whether you're in zone or man. So, and, there were some quick plays too. I think the second touchdown to Smith was a pretty quick drop, and then just a lob over the top, and they just made a great throw and catch. That's sort of the issue. But Tennessee, and then you throw in the running backs. They threw the running backs well. They ran some pick routes to get those guys open, to get some of their receivers open. It was just a really great game plan, and Chip Kelly really schemed some things up. And, is there anything Tennessee could have done differently? I don't know, because they got, I mean, you look at the weapons that this team has, that Ohio State has, and um, I don't know how you stop them. I mean, you've got to have a lot of bases covered to slow them down, and Tennessee didn't do anything to really slow them down, other than a couple of drives there in the second quarter. So just sort of looking big picture, I think you can maybe touch on this thing as we get further out from this game. I think this is maybe more about what Ohio State did than what Tennessee did. And certainly, Tennessee could have done some things better, and they could have used Dylan Sampson and maybe had some receivers, but I don't know. I mean, Ohio State was so on from the jump that would it have mattered? I mean, they probably could have beaten anybody in the country the way they played that game the other night. So it's disappointing that Tennessee was on the wrong end of it, but they were, and that's the reality.
It is. And Tim Banks did not say much post game. He said some words, but it was very generic. You could tell he was trying to get through his interview, and I don't blame him. Tough loss, tough performance, and I think they were surprised. Josh Heupel talked about it, how he was surprised that the defensive line got pushed around the way that it did. I thought it was also an all systems fail for the offense, and we will discuss the offensive performance here in a moment. But first, we do need to catch a break before we continue here on the GoVols 247 Podcast. Welcome back into the GoVols 247 Podcast, a Christmas Eve edition of the GoVols 247 Podcast. I am Ben McKee, and I am joined by Patrick Brown on this edition, trying to get going here on a Monday morning following our weekend trip to Columbus. We appreciate everybody who followed along with our coverage over the weekend and throughout the season. There's plenty of coverage up at GoVols247.com. And although tomorrow is Christmas Eve, Wednesday is Christmas, we will have plenty of coverage throughout the week as well, putting a bow on the loss to Ohio State, putting a bow on the 2024 season. And, of course, the transfer portal is beginning to heat up, and Tennessee is in the mix for some transfers, and we'll be looking to host more transfers here in the next week or so following a short dead period. So please make sure that you're locked into GoVols247.com for all of your Tennessee football coverage. And then, of course, if you're listening to this, if you don't mind taking a quick moment to go like, rate, and review the podcast wherever you get your podcast, we would greatly appreciate that. That's for the people who are listening. If you are watching us here on YouTube, if you wouldn't mind checking down below whether or not you are subscribed to our YouTube page, we would greatly appreciate that as well. Patrick, I thought it was all systems fail for the offense as well. You didn't have Dylan Sampson, which was not ideal. Did not realize how significant of an injury that was. He did retweak it early in the football game, so it was not as bad it seemed going into it as it ended up being. It seemed like Tennessee thought that it would get more out of Dylan Sampson. Didn't think that he would be able to provide the usual workload that he did throughout the season, but didn't think that he would be that limited as well. But I don't know that it would have mattered. Kind of what you mentioned at the end of the first segment. Offensive line continues to be an issue for Tennessee. That was evident in pass pro. That was evident in the running game. And yes, Dylan Sampson would have helped, of course, but I still think Tennessee loses that football game by double digits, even if Dylan Sampson is available in the capacity that he was, because of the inability to get anything going in the trenches and the inability to get anything going in the passing game. Now, that leads me to your question of how you felt Nico Iamaleava played, but also, and not to go too big picture, but also your thoughts on where Nico stands going into the offseason, because I've seen a lot of talk since the game ended about doubt with Nico and a lot of people questioning whether he is the guy or not. And I just don't quite get it. I don't understand how you can watch that offensive performance and think that Nico was the issue. I'm not saying he played perfect football, and he didn't quite have the year that I thought he would have. I think he had a good year, a really solid year for a first-year starter. I'd be lying if I said I didn't expect a little bit more from him, but I kind of view it like I do Bo Nix at Auburn at the moment. Everybody thought Auburn had a Bo Nix problem. Bo Nix had a Gus Malzahn problem. Bo Nix had an Auburn problem, and he got away from Auburn and Gus Malzahn and surrounded himself with some weapons. And look what he did at Oregon. Look what he's doing now with Sean Payton and the Denver Broncos. I think Nico Iamaleava is not at all the problem. Tennessee does not have a Nico Iamaleava problem. Tennessee has a offensive line problem. Tennessee has a wide receiver problem, and they got outcoached on Saturday night as well. Again, I'm not at all saying that Nico played like Peyton Manning did back in the day with Jay Graham against Ohio State. I don't. Some of the discourse I've seen on social media just does not make sense to me. I don't know how you could watch this season or watch that football game and think that, oh man, Tennessee has a Nico Iamaleava problem. I think Nico Iamaleava has a lack of weapons problem, and that'll lead us into our bigger picture conversation before we get out of here and how Tennessee needs to surround Nico better next year. But I thought, given the circumstances, he played okay. I thought he was very gritty. I thought he played a very tough football game with how he ran the football and gave the offense a little bit of a chance. I mean, he's the reason that it could have been a one-score game if Tennessee comes out of the locker room after halftime and scores on their first possession. So your thoughts on Nico Iamaleava in that game, but then also heading into the offseason?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would agree that the list of issues he's well down it. And it felt, honestly, with the defense completely no showing and Dylan Sampson not being there and receivers dropping like flies, it felt like Nico was taking on the entire Ohio State Buckeye team for most of the night. It felt like it was one man against an army, just the way they were struggling everywhere else around him. So I do think he was a little jittery early. The early third down, he kind of bailed out of the pocket a little bit early. He maybe had Kitzelman open, with a guy on his back hip. If you put that ball in the right spot, you've got a chance to catch it. And then even behind it, he's got Dante Thornton open. But by that point, he had maybe taken his eyes down and seen the pass rush. And he just looked a little nervous, the moment was a little big for him. He kind of looked like October Nico at that point, but he didn't even complete a pass till second quarter, and his first two completions were big time throws sort of, between defenders. So, and then they ran him a lot. I think 20 carries is what he ended up with. Of course, the sacks are included in those carries because college football is stupid with the way it the way it tracks those plays. But I don't think he had gone over 12 rushing attempts in a game all season, only 2 games of double-digit rushing attempts. And he's a passer who can run. He's not really I don't know that he's a dual threat guy. Does he need to be more of a dual threat based on some of the things we've seen him do? Yes. But I think it just felt like he was taking on the entire team at some point. And there's the worrying trends that, moving forward, big picture from this offense is that it was up and down all season, but the lack of explosiveness in the Georgia and Ohio State games and the way they were second best on the line of scrimmage in both those games is what is the big takeaway from me from this game, and really that game too. Because if you say you want to compete with the Ohio States and the Georgias of the world, you're going to be, as you go back and review this season, you're maybe going to put a little bit more emphasis on those games, right? I mean, you beat Alabama, you beat everybody else on your schedule, but you're going to have to beat the Ohio States and Georgias to go from being good enough to get in the playoff to being good enough to move past that point. So those are issues that have got to be addressed. And you could say, honestly, Ben, that they've started to address some of the offensive line issues because you have a 5-star freshman coming in who was watching your right tackles struggle badly. David Sanders Jr. over there. We've already gotten several questions this month about, hey, would you pencil him in as a starting right tackle? I would at this point. I will when I do a early depth chart once the roster management mode sort of slows down. But and then you mentioned Wendell Moy from Arizona is going to be sort of the plug and play replacement for I guess maybe Javonte Spraggins. We'll see what happens with Andre Carriage, but if he doesn't come back, I mean, that's a chance for Tennessee to go get somebody. Josh Thompson is a Northwestern transfer, a 2-year starter that they've hosted and he's been to several big time schools, so he's got some really good options. Tennessee, we'll see if they end up getting him, but they've got to get better up front, and they've got to get in more weapons on the outside, and they're going to lose Brew McCoy and Dante Thornton. You look at the guys coming back next season, or slated to come back next season. I guess at this point, everybody is still, in that sort of window where they're determining what they're doing. That's just the reality of college football these days, is that anyone on your roster theoretically could leave. But Mike Matthews and Chris Brazzell stepped up for you against Vanderbilt. They were nowhere to be seen in this game. Brazzell had some plays that he didn't make. They played Braylon Staley 50 something snaps. I mean, he'd probably more than he played all season because Squirrel got hurt early in the game. And they've got to find some more weapons for him. And that was probably my biggest takeaway, is that Nico was just the grit and toughness he showed in taking hits and sort of leading the offense, leading this banged up, overwhelmed offense down the field for even 3 scoring drives, I guess, showed a lot about him to me. And that probably my biggest takeaway with him is that, you need to get him some help. I mean, you need to get him more help. You expect him, okay, he didn't maybe live up to expectations. Some of that's probably not his own fault, right? I mean, they need to do some things, too, I think, schematically to help him, where that they need to make things a little bit easier for him. I think schematically is the easiest way to put it without getting into a bunch of details. So, but if you expect him to take a big jump from year 1 to year 2, which is natural, right? You need to make sure that you get him an offensive line that can protect him better, and you get him some weapons that can make plays, because this is really 2 years in a row where Tennessee they have not replaced Jalen Hyatt, Cedric Tillman. Those guys were difference makers, and they haven't had that. They haven't had those dudes out there on the outside that give defenses such a tough time.
It's a critical offseason for Josh Heupel and this coaching staff. Not at all putting them on the hot seat or anything like that. It may be hard to see here this morning, but at the end of the day, Tennessee went 10-3, and another 10-win season for Josh Heupel. Those have been few and far between since the end of the Philip Fulmer era. That is nothing to scoff at. There was a lot of success this season, and Tennessee is a good program right now. Tennessee is a really good program right now. It's top 10, top 12 program in the country at the moment. But in order to take that next step and go from good to great, I think that there's going to need to be a lot of internal conversations and self-evaluation, and not just self-evaluating for the sake of self-evaluating, because you need to do that at the beginning of every offseason, but you need to be real with yourself as well. And offensively, address and figure out exactly why the tempo has gone away. Is that because you're evolving and adjusting to more of an SEC style of play? Or is that because you haven't had the personnel that you feel allows you to go up tempo the way you did a couple of years ago? Why are our offensive linemen that we are signing, why are they not playing? Why are they not starting? Why are we only starting transfers on the offensive line? Why are the first-year receivers that we bring in, why are they having a hard time having success in their first year? Why are we missing on wide receiver evaluations? You just had 4 leave the program in the last 2 weeks, where you just flat out swung and missed on the evaluations with Jazz Nimrod, with Nathan Laycock, with Nate Spillman, with Caleb Webb. Those are 4 just absolute swings and misses. And taking a body to take a body, you get put in the situation that you were put in on Saturday night at Ohio State. And now there is context, right? Like, a lot of those receivers that I just mentioned, they were brought in where it was a bit more of a difficult time to recruit, because you weren't as far removed from the Jeremy Pruitt stuff as you are now. So you are bringing in your Braylon Staley's and your Mike Matthews, and it looks like you are going to have something there more than you have with the guys that I just mentioned and the guys that transferred out. You have Travis Smith coming in. You have Rodarius Jackson. Those seem like good pickups for you. So maybe now that you're further away and you don't have scholarship limitations, and now you have a brand to sell, you have an offense to sell, you have quarterbacks, Faison to sell, George McIntyre to sell, another year of Nico. Maybe we'll see less swing and miss, and maybe the swings and misses were a byproduct of how tough it was for them early on in their tenure. That is not an excuse. To me, that is a fair, logical reason. Not an excuse, but you still need to have these conversations of what is going wrong with what we're doing along the offensive line. What is going wrong at receiver? You're doing well at tight end. You're doing well at quarterback. You're doing well at running back. But these other two positions are holding us back right now, especially along the offensive line, because that affects your passing game and your running game. That's killing two birds with one stone, quite frankly. So it's a critical offseason in terms of self-evaluation. I feel like the hardest step to take is that good from great step. And that's the one, excuse me, I'm still trying to get over this flu. That's the one that Tennessee is trying to make. And that was my big picture takeaway walking away from the horseshoe on Saturday night, is that the two games in which Tennessee was embarrassed this year were against two of the three best rosters in the country. I think Oregon, Georgia, and Ohio State had the three best rosters in the country, and they have done a great job of going out and accumulating talent. And Tennessee has done a really good job, but what steps do we need to take to make sure that we're doing a great job? Because you could have done things differently. Like you said earlier, Patrick, Tennessee could have played better. But at the end of the day, even if Tennessee's best is not beating Ohio State's best. So how do you get to a level to where your personnel is on par with Ohio State's? That's where Tennessee is going to take the next step. But it's not just the offense. Defensively as well, there's some positions on the second and third level of the defense that need to be reevaluated as well. And more talent needs to be added to those spots if you're going to make up ground with the teams like Georgia and Ohio State.
Yeah, I would probably disagree with you on one part, and that's I would not lump Ohio State and Georgia. I would not lump those two games in there. I mean, Tennessee was very competitive against Georgia well into that game. That game was in doubt. This game was not in doubt from early third quarter. And I posted this on the checkerboard last night, shared this thought. But to me, this is a successful season that ended with a reality check. And the reality check is that, I mean, this might be about your ceiling if you're Tennessee. I mean, if you want to look at the team talent composite on 24/7 Sports, Ohio State has 69 nice 5- and 4-star players. Tennessee has 41. And without looking and double checking who those 4 5-stars are, Ohio State has 14 5-stars. Tennessee has 4. That's a huge gap. And maybe the better composite we need to use in this day and age is how much does your team cost in NIL money, right? Because Ohio State very openly was like, our team is $20 million. I don't know how much Tennessee's team costs, but it's not $20 million. So if you're going to get on that level, I mean, you might need an extra $10 million, which is not feasible. And I don't love these programs that have already asked fans to pay ticket prices and parking, and you're having to shell out hotel money, and now you're like, oh, can you fund the team too? I don't love that.
On the flip
other
side
programs
of that,
doing that who's not. Go ahead.
Right. There are a lot doing into it, but now for like Tennessee, like you put in this 10% talent fee into the tickets and whatnot, and
Yeah,
at some point there's going to be an expectation of a return on investment. And I'm not even necessarily talking about the wins and losses, but you can't implement a 10% talent fee and then just kind of poke and prod around in the transfer portal and think that fans aren't going to wonder what you're doing with this 10% talent fee. You got to put that 10% talent fee to good use and close the gap with these teams that we are mentioning with that talent fee and the millions of other ways that Tennessee is generating revenue. Because at some point, fans are going to start asking questions. Okay, why are you're implementing all these things? Everything is so expensive. Why are we not more talented?
Well, and I think the biggest question that Josh Heupel has to answer, and speaking of money, he's getting paid $9 million to figure this out, is I think he's got to be careful not to overreact to one game, because again, you were good enough to get there. What you did is good enough to get to the playoff. Now you need to figure out how to get over that hump. And what that is what does that look like? I don't know. Does it mean making changes on the coaching staff? Does it mean, these are questions that have to be answered. And I would say, again, Tennessee is not a transfer portal first team. They're just not. That just needs to be the expectation. That's not what they've done. They maybe have allocated more of those resources to their recruiting classes, right? They just brought in a top 10 recruiting class for the second cycle in a row. I don't think they've lost anybody from last season's class yet either, right? I mean, the 2023 class has been, that class is dwindling. The numbers from that group that are still here are dwindling fast. But the 2024 group is still all here. You got the 2025 class coming in. None of those, some of those big time guys aren't coming in for free. So they're going to allocate resources to that. They're going to allocate resources to keeping guys they want to keep, which is something they've been good at doing under this staff. So I know everybody sees what Auburn's doing and what Ole Miss is doing. It's just a different model. And if you want to be honest about it, Tennessee's model got to the playoff this season and Ole Miss's didn't. And Auburn went 5-7. So there are different ways to get there. And Tennessee has gotten there. And I think that's the question that Josh Heupel has to figure out is like, okay, am I good with I guess we want to use a lack of a better term, status quo. The status quo is getting you around 10 wins a season, right? In this day and age, it's going to be good enough to get you in the playoffs. So, okay, what do we have to do maybe during the regular season to get that first round playoff game at home? Because obviously they've been very good. With Tennessee beating Ohio State at home, we'll never know. They didn't play the game there. So, you have to that means you have to be probably one of the 6-7 best teams in the country. It means you might have to get to Atlanta, which is tough in the SEC, right? But the risk of upsetting the status quo and maybe making, initiating staff changes for really the first time in his tenure, right? Because there's not been a lot of turnover on the staff. And to that point, the entire offensive staff is under contract for next year, where Tim Banks, Mike Eckler, and Willie Martinez at this stage, as of us recording this, don't have new deals past January. So, if you're going to make changes there for the first time really under your tenure, and that's not been Heupel's MO. So something else I posted the other night is that, people that are like wanting to fire everybody left and right, probably going to be disappointed because unless Josh Heupel breaks his trend, there might not be a bunch of staff changes this season. So, if he did do that, there's risk involved, right? I mean, Tennessee, this program knows well enough that coaching hires that might have seemed like home runs when they were made didn't pan out. Look at Bob Shoop. He was supposed to be the guy that was going to take Butch Jones to the next level. Did that work out? No. They brought Jim Chaney in. Jeremy Pruitt did after his first season. It was a big move. They took him from Georgia. Did it work out? No. Obviously, there were different circumstances for those coaching staffs and those situations. But if you break off from what got you to this point, there is risk that it might backfire on you. So that's the question to me that has to be answered. And again, I don't know what's right or wrong, Ben, because, and they're not paying me $9 million a year to figure that out. Would I like the paycheck? Yes, but there's a lot of pressure that comes with it. So to me, that's the sort of dilemma Tennessee's in is what do you want to be? That's the big offseason question is do you want to, how willing are you to try to get to the next level at the risk that it might not work, right? I mean, you look at Ohio State, they determined that they were tired of watching Michigan win the national title and win the Big Ten. So what do? They go out and invest a bunch more money. They go out and get Chip Kelly. It helped that Chip Kelly coached Ryan Day at New Hampshire. So I don't know what the equivalent would be of that for Tennessee, but but they've gone all in. The team that just beat you went all in, and they have a very obviously very talented team that is very capable of going all the way now that they have put the Michigan game behind them. So, that's where you got to be if you're going to try to get to the level of a Georgia or an Ohio State, and maybe Ohio State's an extreme because I don't think everybody's, I don't know that every team up at the top level of the talent food chain is, $20 million. And maybe that's the composite ranking we need, Ben, is we don't need how many blue 4 and 5 stars you have. We need how much money did you spend on your roster? Because I mean, that's where we are in this day and age. Is it is basically a mini NFL, but there's no salary cap. So how you have to put together the best team you can each year for the money that you have, and you don't have like the cash flow bin is not endless for Tennessee, or really, I guess maybe anybody. Maybe Ohio State's the difference in that one, and I bet Oregon probably is a pretty pricey team too. So that's the situation. That's sort of the dilemma as Tennessee goes into offseason, and I don't know what those answers are. People are going to have their opinion. The overreaction. I don't want to say overreaction. The reaction to this game is that so much of what got Tennessee needs to be blown up and do this, that, and the other. And I don't think it's that simple. And I think that's the big question: is Tennessee has gotten to this point. Are they okay with getting to this point and hoping that once they get there, they can play better or get a better matchup? Or do they need to take the next steps to get better to this point where, hey, maybe you do get to Atlanta and you host in the first round to where you don't have to worry about going on the road where you're not very good. But having said that, next season, given that they can't beat Georgia at this point, they're going to have to win at Alabama or at Florida. And they haven't won at either of those places in a long time. So that's what you're looking at. So, a lot of big questions for this offseason. A lot of questions for this team going into this offseason. But that's sort of every offseason, right? I mean, that's just sort of the nature of the sport at this point.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that Tennessee should go out and go the Ole Miss route or Ohio State route even and just spin in the portal. Because that does not guarantee.
It's easy to say that though, because it's not our money, and it's not the fans that are saying this. It's not their money, but it's a natural reaction, right? And to say, hey, just if you spend $5 million more, you'll have a $5 million theoretically better team,
right? And it doesn't work like that. As we saw with Ole Miss this year, we've seen multiple teams come up short after spending big in the portal. In football, in basketball, in baseball, it just doesn't guarantee you success. You have to lay the foundation of your program through the high school ranks. I'm a big believer in that. I've said that 1,000 times. I think Rick Barnes and Tony Vitello are doing it perfectly. And then when the portal rolls around, they fill in where they need to. And I do feel like Tennessee football is doing that to a certain extent. But I also feel like there's been some players enter the portal, really good players, that would be upgrades at positions of need or at positions that should be upgraded. There's a fine line. You should not at all risk your culture for the portal. Not at all suggesting that. Not at all saying that you should be reckless. But I do think Tennessee could stand to be more aggressive in the portal in pursuing guys at different positions. And who knows? Maybe they are being more aggressive than it seems behind the scenes. But this is just a huge offseason from a personnel standpoint. It needs to upgrade its personnel. And again, they're doing a really good job, and it has gotten them to this point. But is what they are doing and what they have been doing good enough for them to take the next step? I would lean towards a no, quite frankly, because
it's a resounding no based on the Ohio State Georgia games.
Exactly.
I mean,
exactly, and those are two specific games, but the offensive line was an issue throughout the season, and that's something that has to get corrected moving forward against anybody. Because now, in hindsight, like Tennessee did benefit from a bit of an easier schedule than it typically plays. I mean, outside of Alabama, who did Tennessee beat this year? They benefited from NC State, Oklahoma, Mississippi State, Florida at the time, not being in great spots. So
you're just slamming the Gasparilla Bowl champions.
I am slamming the Gasparilla Bowl champions. So they are doing a lot of things well. This is about, okay, what's it going to take that next step? And that's why I think it's so critical that they are very honest with themselves on both sides of the football at different spots early on in this offseason. And I'm not saying that staff changes are the complete answer. There are some assistants that I think that they could upgrade from. I'm not going to lie. But I also recognize that, again, they're still a 10-win football team. So it's not like everything needs to be blown up. But legitimate changes, strong changes need to be made. this offseason in order for them to take the next step. They need to reevaluate what they're doing and tweak some things. I think tweak's a fair word. I do think that I said strong changes need to be made. I think tweak's a fine word as well with some of the different things that they are doing. But there's no doubt that it's a critical offseason here for Josh Heupel and his program.
Tweak is a good word because there's other thing, the obvious big ones are make staff changes and invest more money in the roster. But I mean, there are probably things you can do as you self-scout and quality control and things like that, that maybe you adjust how you do something in the offseason. I mean, how many times we heard oh, this team is prepared to they've been trying to gear themselves up to beat so-and-so the entire offseason, right? Like, we've heard that before. Maybe there's definitely, I think, things they can do schematically, particularly on offense. And you laid a lot of them out, Ben, some of the things about the tempo, like why we get a lot of questions about Alex Golesh. And look, USF they've gone 6-6 2 years in a row. They were outside the top 40 nationally in scoring offense and total offense. So it's not like Golesh has gone there and replicated what Tennessee did in 2022 necessarily. But clearly there has been a different, I don't say identity, but they've just done things differently on offense the last 2 seasons. And it hasn't been, obviously they have not been the best offense in college football like they were 2 years ago. So I think there's some things they need to figure out on that side of it as well. And maybe that's part of the tweaks you can make. But I would, my advice to fans as we get sort of, the portal is open for 5 more days. It closes on the 28th since Tennessee is over. There's not that 5-day window after a playoff game. I guess graduate transfers can go in at any point. So 2 things on the portal front is that's the first thing. And we should know this from the past couple of cycles, Ben, that there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes. Maybe it's less because it's Christmas. I don't know. We'll see. But cryptic social media posts, you'll have people on message boards saying, oh, I'm hearing this about, we're going to have this many people leave. There's probably going to be more entries. Christian Harrison announced Sunday night he's going to the portal. He's the first guy after the game to do that there. I assume there will be more. There's already been somewhat Squirrel White crypticness on Instagram.
He posted the
seen that the last couple years
on his Instagram story.
We got asked, are there going to be any surprise entries? The real answer should be nothing should surprise you in this day and age, because literally you hear this from coaches, like literally your entire team is free agents and it's about, are you going to re-sign them or not? So, as we mentioned, Tennessee's done a good job at player retention, but we'll have to see. There might be guys that walk in there and walk and say, "Hey, I want this," and Tennessee's like, "We don't think you're worth that much," and go separate ways. It happened a lot with the secondary last season. So that's just the nature of the beast at this point. So the best advice I can say is to consider everything and believe nothing, because that's just the way it goes. The other thing about the portal is that we're in a dead period right now for portal visits, so there won't be any for the rest of the year. For the rest of the calendar year, I should say, because I assume it's because of the holidays. So the portal, there's a 5-day window. This is all according to Ryan Callahan, so I assume it's right. But he also forgot his computer and didn't take it to Columbus. So how much can we really trust him? But portal visitors have a 5-day window at the start of January where they can visit. And then I think visits for everyone pick back up on the 6th and go through, I think, the old signing day date, which is early February. But there's a 3-day window. I think that is another dead period. But Tennessee won't be able to host any transfers until January. They had hosted some last week. They obviously got Wendell Moy. Josh Thompson was another one. They had a couple defensive linemen come as well. So those are important things as we get into off-season mode that fans need to be aware of.
And we will have plenty of coverage of it all at GoVols247.com. Basketball back in action tonight against a 9-3 MTSU team. The second to last game before conference play. Tennessee basketball will host Norfolk State on New Year's Eve at 3:00. And then
is Michael Vick coaching the basketball team too, by chance, or just the football team?
Marcus Vick is coaching the basketball team. Isn't that his brother's name, Marcus?
Yeah, throwback name there.
Yeah, he is coaching the basketball team. So you can expect to see the Vicks in Knoxville on New Year's Eve afternoon. And then Tennessee will welcome John Calipari, Jonas Adu, and the Hogs that Saturday, January 4th, for the start of conference play. I'll have plenty of coverage of Tennessee basketball. Also, the start of January means it's time to start previewing Tennessee baseball and the defending champs. Patrick, Ryan will certainly have all the football coverage that you need, and everything will be covered at GoVols247.com. So please be sure to check everything out that we're doing, and you can still sign up through the end of the month for 50% off. And what we feel like is a great deal. So, Patrick, thanks for doing this on Christmas Eve. And I'm not sure when we'll be back with a podcast. I imagine with it being Christmas, and I'm going out of town later this week. Ryan is out of town. Wes is doing West things. We'll probably back with you next week. So until we talk to you next time, Patrick, we greatly appreciate you and wish you and your family a Merry Christmas.
Indeed. Merry Christmas to you, Ben, and your family. Merry Christmas to everyone listening out there. Hope you guys have a good holiday.
Absolutely. Merry Christmas. Hope you and yours are doing well and enjoy your week with friends and family. For Patrick Brown, I'm Ben McKee. This has been another edition of the GoVols247 Podcast.